Right, let's talk about words of power, revolution, love, truth, and justice. Specifically, words that used to mean something important. Ideals of the 1960s bastardized behind terms such as boomer, as if everybody back then had a silver spoon, was a fortunate son forgot a bone spur draft deferment. Woke is now reduced to punchlines. This is how the government uses music, media, and movies to create rifts between regions, races, sports fans, and even provides opposing bandanas to different prison groups to destroy the legacy of the Brown Berets, Weatherman, and Black Panthers. Take the word woke, a soul brother phrase for truther, from the era when whispering about cops moonlighting for the Klan or secret deals between bankers and real estate agents were life and death. Originally a call from black activists to stay aware of systemic injustice and racial prejudice, it meant being alert. Cluing in the next brother about sundown towns, dirty judges, and racist land barons who steal farms and small businesses with frame-ups and rigged laws to step on the little guy. Being conscious means taking time and comfort away from yourself to help a fallen member of the community. The old lady who used to bake you treats is now living in her car because Walmart and Amazon looted small business with COVID shutdowns. What is woke now? It's been hijacked into an insult for anyone who says maybe women should be paid the same as men or that history books should include actual history. It's a bait and switch. A verbal eye roll that dismisses fairness before it starts. It's like putting your fingers in your ears and shouting la la la. And it's not just woke. Look at anarchism. Kropotkin, Chomsky, Cleve Ahava, a complex political philosophy about societies without coercive hierarchies, community gardens, co-ops not smashing Starbucks windows. Today the media shows a hoodie and a dumpster fire. The nuance is gone, replaced by caricature. That makes it easy to discredit critics. Then there's End the Fed, the pre-2008 Libertarian Tea Party, stolen by Fox News that is owned by Israel first oligarch Murdoch, and a Saudi prince with ties to 9/11 cover-up, hiding stories about art students planting devices on 9/11 to frame Palestinians and Iraqis for the suspicious stock market irregularities before Sept 11 and October 7th. Woke began as a serious critique of the Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel with huge power. It was hijacked by Sarah Palin and John McCain to be about lynching Mexicans and divisive politics during Obama years. People across the spectrum raised questions about transparency and boom and bust cycles that hurt ordinary people. Just as listening to Ron Paul or Cynthia McKinney was framed as being a radical racist or black nationalist when she confronted Donald Rumsfeld on Afghani dancing boys, CIA contractor human trafficking, National Guard mass graves of black gun owners during Hurricane Katrina. She was chased out of politics by Israeli white supremacist donors, similar to James Trafficant, framed and sent to prison for blocking Israeli aid over their murder of Americans. Now the phrase is linked to fringe conspiracists, 9/11 truthers, John F. Kennedy murder investigators, and those looking into satanic ritual abuse, not from heavy metal kids, but of cults of super-rich Israel first lobbyists who erect temples of Baal on secret islands. Ted Gunderson investigating CIA mind control cults using missing children as assassins. Secret tunnels in McMartin Preschool and the dark legacy of Michael Aquino Mine War document. Look at the romance of a People 1933 Chicago Soldier Field Moloch ceremony by the Jewish Agency for Palestine. Now wait for Hasbara Shills to accuse you of wearing tinfoil hats ranting about lizard people, which isn't a bad metaphor for gold-hoarding monarchs and their shadowy Masonic banking cabal. Valid questions are drowned by ridicule. The message, question the system, you're a crackpot. On some level, the evidence becomes too strong to ignore, but learned attitudes to ridicule free speakers prevails even as Israeli bad actors openly train high school kids to become spies on U.S. soil, sending Jewish teenagers to be ensnared in romantic encounters with IDF assets trained in brainwashing and flipping innocent kids into working against America. Even when Nobel-winning economists echo concerns, you're lumped with the nutters as quoted by David Icke and Peter Dale Scott, who are largely written out of history as controlled opposition misused the term deep state coined by them to describe war profiteers of the oil and invasion lobby. Finally, patriot. Once, someone who loved their country enough to hold it accountable, a term that could mean both InfoWars truthers and left-wing radicals who bled in Vietnam and came back wounded in preaching peace. So, how did this massive word laundering operation happen? Brainwashing, media monopolies, a Jewish conspiracy of unelected robber barons who hide the quotes of their Chabad Lubavitch Council of Elders? Well, for that, you need to meet the secret puppet masters of pop culture. Intelligence agencies, private security firms who wage wars of assassination, black sites, and child trafficking? Yes, the same folks who are really good at overthrowing governments use organized crime to terrorize leftists, wipe out indigenous tribes and cover up massive crimes like the Yemenite baby affair, Tuskegee syphilis experiments and child abuse. Criminals inciting atrocity are also surprisingly skilled at script doctoring. The CIA in particular has a long and sordid history of cultural manipulation. One of their greatest hits was Operation Mockingbird, a clandestine campaign that began in the 1950s to influence domestic and foreign media. The CIA recruited leading journalist editors to work as censors and broadcasters, who guard stories as gatekeepers to maintain attitudes threatening to the status quo, like Paul Robeson when he humiliated the McCarthy hearings on lynching when asked about communism, some knowingly, some not, to push pro-robber baron Wall Street and Tel Aviv narratives, and to discredit anything that smelled vaguely of communism, socialism, secular pan-Arabism, guerrilla war, free love, peace, solidarity, or just independent thought. It was a state-sponsored PR firm with spies who pose as billionaires planted in tech to launder CIA and DARPA projects from the Tavistock Institute. This wasn't just about planting a few articles in the New York Times. The CIA funded literary magazines, elevated vapid celebrities, pushed bad music and white faces to steal rock and roll or rap to whitewash revolutionary and conscious themes threatening to the police state, civil asset forfeiture crime rings of dirty cops, CIA drug deals, or the destabilization of the ghetto to flip communities with gentrifier-sponsored art exhibits, and even secretly financed Hollywood movies. Pushed bands that promoted drugs and weaponized black wealth with a controlled shill class, non-threatening to the white supremacist Jews who own their media. Think tanks like CFR, Heritage Foundation, IPAC, and other centers of British Crown banker world government understood that culture is the battlefield where hearts and minds are one. Why issue a press release when you can fund an abstract expressionist painting that subtly screams America good, Russia bad, an old game of rigging sectarian violence to destabilize regions called balkanization? Think back on 1950s values, cowboys, honest cops, miraculous and daring campaigns by the British Army and Israelis. Why not help produce an animated film adaptation of George Orwell's Animal Farm, with a slightly altered ending that frames all revolution as inevitably leading to brutal totalitarianism, conveniently ignoring the story's critique of unchecked power in any form? Was our greatest threat 1812, 1913, 1948, or 1984? And then we get to the really weird stuff like MK Ultra. While most people associate it with horrific mind control experiments involving LSD and hypnosis, a key part of the project was about understanding and manipulating social behavior on a mass scale. It was a deep dive into the human psyche to figure out how to direct public opinion and control dissent. The project's findings didn't just stay in a locked filing cabinet, they informed decades of psychological operations, or psyops. Now let's connect the dots between spooky spy games and the real world. This cultural engineering isn't just an academic exercise, it has a very practical purpose. That purpose is often to sell you something you would never, ever buy on your own, like a war. Getting a democratic nation to support sending its young people to die abroad is a tough sell. You can't just say we need to secure access to oil reserves for Chevron. No, you need a story. You need a hero, a villain, a high-stakes plot. This is where the media shines, working hand in glove with intelligence agencies and government press offices. Think about the lead-up to the Iraq War. We were sold a terrifying narrative of weapons of mass destruction, imminent threats, and a diabolical dictator who was supposedly one bad day away from nuking London. It was a story repeated endlessly by cable news anchors, administration officials, expert commentators, many of whom had deep ties to the defense industry. The media didn't just report the government's claims, they amplified them. So, what does this manufactured culture actually produce in the real world? The consequences aren't just bad TV shows or dumbed-down political discourse. They are horrifyingly real and honestly, often drenched in blood. The term Banana Republic might sound like a joke or, a clothing store, but it was actually coined to describe countries in Central America whose governments were effectively controlled by U.S. fruit companies, like the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita. When democratically elected leaders in places like Guatemala tried to implement land reforms that threatened the company's massive profits, the CIA stepped in. They orchestrated a coup in 1954, installed a brutal military dictator, and plunged the country into decades of civil war, all to ensure cheap bananas for American breakfast tables. This isn't ancient history. The same pattern repeats itself with different products and different corporations. Just look at the modern rush for electric cars. It's pitched to us as a clean, green, ethical choice. But where do the essential components for those batteries like lithium and cobalt actually come from? A huge chunk of the world's lithium is in Bolivia. In 2019, when Bolivia's socialist president, Evo Morales, was working to nationalize the country's lithium reserves to ensure the profits benefited his own people, he was overthrown in a military coup. A coup that was immediately endorsed by the US government and celebrated by certain Western business interests, including famously Elon Musk, who tweeted, "We will coup whoever we want, deal with it." The Green Revolution, it turns out, is often powered by old-school imperialism. The story is even more grim in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which supplies the majority of the world's cobalt. The mining industry there is notorious for its horrific labor practices, including widespread use of child labor. This all forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is it worth it? Is the stability and immense wealth of a tiny elite ruling class, executives of multinational corporations, big bankers, defense contractors, worth the staggering human cost in the developing world? Is the convenience of a cheap banana or a fast smartphone worth a civil war in Guatemala or child labor in the Congo? When you strip away the patriotic slogans and carefully crafted media narratives, you are left with a brutal calculation. We are trading human lives and national sovereignty for corporate profits and geopolitical dominance. Consider the support for Suharto's dictatorship in Indonesia. After he took power in a bloody coup in 1965, his regime went on to murder up to 1 million people. Communists, unionists, intellectuals, anyone deemed a threat. The US government not only knew about the slaughter but actively supported it, providing lists of dissidents and military aid. Why? Because Suharto was anti-communist and opened up Indonesia's vast natural resources to Western corporations. The official line was about containing communism, but the result was genocide in the service of capitalism. Now, let's bring this back home. Would the people who founded the United States even recognize the country it has become? It's a fun little parlor game, but it's also a deeply serious question. The founding fathers were, to be clear, flawed, hypocritical men who owned slaves. But they were also genuinely terrified of two things: standing armies, concentrated financial power. They saw a large, permanent military as a tool for imperial ambition that would inevitably be used to suppress liberty at home and abroad. They saw powerful central banks as engines of corruption, enslaving the government to a wealthy financial elite. And what do we have today? The largest standing military in human history, and a global financial system dominated by a handful of megabanks. Thomas Jefferson famously said that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. Imagine showing him the 2008 financial crisis, where banks gambled away the global economy, received a massive taxpayer bailout, and then faced virtually no consequences. Or showing him how Wall Street firms and defense contractors spend billions on lobbying to write their own regulations and push for more wars, from which they directly profit. He would probably have a complete meltdown. The system he feared, a government of, by, and for the bankers, is not some distant threat. So here we are at the end of this rather depressing journey through the looking glass. We've seen how words of protest and justice, woke, anarchist, patriot, have been stripped of power and turned into weapons against the people they were meant to empower. Intelligence agencies and their media partners have become the architects of our cultural reality, building narratives that serve the powerful, justify endless war, and distract us from the mechanics of empire. It's a giant global magic trick. We are the audience, applauding politely as our rights vanish before our very eyes. The manipulation of language is not a trivial matter. It is the first and most crucial step in controlling thought. When you can no longer articulate a problem clearly, you can no longer solve it. The next time you hear a word of protest used as an insult, you have to ask yourself a very simple question. Cui bono? Who benefits? So what can we do? The first step is to become conscious of the trick. It's to reclaim the dictionary. We need to remember the real history of resistance, the true meaning of these words. We have to think for ourselves, to look past the easy labels and the manufactured outrage, because if we let them control the words we use, they've already won half the battle. And that right there is their secret ultimate victory.